Hi, and welcome to our video series about biomimicry life principles. Life principles are design lessons from nature and can basically be found in all life on Earth. For each of the 26 principles, we're going to show you an example from the ecosystem of a tree. And just like in nature, all principles are interconnected in a complex web. But to understand them a bit better, they're organized in 6 master principles and 20 sub-principles. So, how does life interact with its local environment? Basically, life is very successful if it is attuned to what's happening around. What's happening locally here? What are the opportunities here? What are relationships that I can form here? What are processes in this system locally here? To be successful, life is responsive to its local environment. In this video, we're going to be talking about 5 principles, starting with the master principle, be locally attuned and responsive. And 4 sub-principles, leverage cyclic processes, use readily available materials and energy, use feedback loops, and cultivate cooperative relationships. And the examples from the ecosystem of our tree for these principles are going to be a story about the peppered moths and their camouflage, the cyclic processes that trees use over the seasons, the readily available energy and material that are used in the Decomposer system, the top of the soil, the use of feedback loops that bats interact with acoustic signals and echoes, and cooperative relationships between trees and mycorrhiza. So let's start with our master principle, be locally attuned and responsive. Our example from nature that we're going to use here is the peppered moth and the pattern and color that these animals use. The peppered moth is a moth that is nocturnal. It's mainly active at night. And during the day, they linger somewhere on the tree trunk, trying not to be seen by predators. And peppered moths live there where there are birch trees. So they need birch trees because as caterpillars, for instance, they eat the leaves of birch trees. And if during the day the adult animals are waiting during the day on the trunk of a birch tree, it's important for them to be camouflaged. So birch tree is white and gray specked, like peppered. So these animals have evolved to look very similar. They're white and gray, blackly peppered, and are almost invisible, basically, on the trunk of a birch tree. But in the population of peppered moths, there are some individuals that are very dark, and normally this is not very successful because they can be seen very easily. But what happens if something changes in this local environment? There are examples where birch trees have turned dark. For instance, in the big start of industrialization in England, cities like Manchester, for example, there was so much pollution from the big industries that entire woodlands, birch woodlands, turned black. And fascinatingly, over just very few generations, the populations of peppered moths in these polluted woodlands turned from mainly white peppered to mainly dark black. And now in the polluted black trunks of the trees, the black animals were perfectly camouflaged. So what's our design guideline here? It's adapt to the immediate environment and integrate yourself. Peppered moths, like many nocturnal moths, are very important in ecosystems. Also in our ecosystem of the tree. The moth, of course, is an important inhabitant of a tree. Their caterpillars eat the leaves, and maybe the trees are not all too happy about that, but there's a good thing. In a healthy ecosystem, we also have bats. Moths are a very important food source for all kinds of bats, which they hunt during the night. Leverage cyclic processes. Our example in nature for this principle are the deciduous trees, like a beech tree, for instance. So trees with big leaves, and the process of their falling leaves in autumn. So, in northern and southern hemispheres on Earth, one of the main cyclic processes over each year is the changing of the seasons. And many trees have adapted to this changing of the season. And in winter, there are some challenges for a tree. The tree always needs water, but it doesn't want to freeze, and also doesn't want to have too much damage if there's a lot of snow falling on top of the entire tree. So deciduous trees have developed the strategy to deal with autumn and winter by letting their leaves fall. So what are they doing? First, they're extracting all the important energy substances that they need. They're taking that out of the leaves and transporting into other organs, parts of the plant body. So this is why the leaves turn from green to brown or yellow or red or orange. What they also do is, if they have substances, maybe even toxins in their body, environmental toxins, pollutions that they want to get rid of, they put that into the leaves and then they let the leaves fall. And this is very important for many trees in the winter time, because normally in spring and summer, the leaves are where the tree does photosynthesis, and this is also the part where the tree loses water. This is important for the entire water transportation system. But water always basically leaves the leaves. So to stop this process of losing water, this is one big reason why they need to get rid of their leaves in winter. Also, if they would keep their leaves, they would have a much bigger surface, more surface for snow to pile up on, and the weight of too much snow could be very dangerous for the breaking off of branches, for example. So, what's our design guideline here? Take advantage of phenomena that repeat themselves. So in our ecosystem of our tree, if our tree is a deciduous tree, like a beech, this is a very, very important part. And in the entire ecosystem, this falling of the leaves is an important part in the combination relationship to the soil system, to all of the organisms that actually are going to change, eat, and basically transform all of the energy and biomass from the leaves into fertile soil again, into nutrients that the tree can absorb again and use again in the next year or in the years to follow. Use readily available materials and energy. And our example from nature for this principle is the Decomposer system in the top layer of the soil, on top of the soil also. So the decomposers. What we're talking about here, remember leaves falling in autumn. Not only do dead leaves fall to the soil, to the ground every year, all kinds of other dead biomass falls to the ground. This can be tiny little dead animals, for instance, or it can be parts of dead fungi. But everything has a purpose in nature, and everything that is dead is now energy and nourishment for other living organisms. And the decomposer ecosystem in the top of a soil is basically a kind of recycling and reprocessing system in a soil. So every biomass, every dead organic material that basically falls to the ground or ends up there is recycled, reprocessed through a cascade of different kinds of species. So this can be insect larvae, they can be worms, bacteria, fungi. They all have different parts to play, different roles. But what happens in general through that system is through all of these organisms, one eats one thing, changes it. This is now energy and nourishment for a different organism. The feces are again nourishment and energy for a different organism. And in the end, through bacterial microorganisms, nutrients are again readily available in the soil. And especially through the bacterial activity, a lot of heat is generated, and this is energy that is there for the system, for other beings in the system. So our design guideline here is work with materials that are in rich supply and make use of freely available energy. Our decomposer system in the ecosystem of a tree is extremely important, of course. If a tree would be living somewhere where there is no decomposer community, then over time, over many years, it would fail to get the nutrients that it needs. This is one reason, of many reasons, why a tree living in a city that is planted in the middle of a street and has no soil beneath it with a decomposer system, this is one reason why trees in cities are not very healthy trees normally. Use feedback loops. And our example for this principle in nature are the bats and their sonar orientation. Bats are absolutely fascinating animals that have adapted to active life, hunting, navigating, flying around in the dark of night. How do they do that? They do it through hearing, or seeing through hearing. They send out acoustic signals, and the echo that comes back from different objects, animals, trees, from the environment, the echoes that come back are translated in their brain into a kind of image. So in some way they can see through acoustic signals that they get back. We can't, of course, imagine how they perceive their environment, but it must be fascinating. But of course, this only works if they send out acoustic signals as often as they can. Because if you're flying around and you're only sending out one signal, then you're not going to know where the tree is when you've flown 5 meters again. You need to know where it is now, where you're oriented. So they need to update their information all the time in a constant flow of information, sending out a signal, getting back echo, sending out a signal, getting back echo. And this is how they navigate, flying around. This is how in the dark they find a tiny little insect flying around. Through the echo they can find it and catch it. And this is also how they can fly around, hunting and not fly into the next tree at the same time. And the fascinating thing is actually some of the insects that they're hunting also engage in a to and fro of information, a process, an information flow. Some of the moths, for instance, are looking for a mate, and they're actually following pheromones, and they fly into the direction where there are more pheromones, where they get a signal, a chemical signal basically through smelling. So there's also a kind of information flow like that. What's our design guideline here? Engage in cyclical information flows in order to modify reactions appropriately. If you start to look at feedback loops and what they really mean and how they work, you will actually find feedback loops in every part of nature, anywhere. And of course also in our ecosystem of the tree, feedback loops are everywhere. And our example of the bats are important animals in the ecosystem of a tree or many trees. They eat many moths that are maybe not exactly friends of a tree. Maybe the caterpillars, like the caterpillars of a peppered moth, eat a lot of leaves. And if there's no balance, if there are no predators to eat these moths, there will be too many caterpillars of these moths eating too many leaves. So this is important balance, these bats hunting at night. Cultivate cooperative relationships. And our example from nature is the relationship that many trees have with fungi. Trees and mycorrhiza. So, trees in the root system are anchored in the soil, and especially through the tips of the roots, through the ramification of the tips of the roots, the trees absorb as much water as they can, as they need, and they absorb the dissolved minerals, nutrients from the soil that they need. Then in the soil, of course, there are many fungi. And in the mycelial network that's spread out in the soil, my mycelial network, basically like little threads, like little roots, are a lot smaller than the roots of trees, and they can get into places where trees can't get to. So they have access to more water than trees have. So trees need water, they don't need sugar, they make it themselves in photosynthesis, they don't need it from the soil. Many fungi in the soil need sugar from somewhere, they can't make it themselves, but they have plenty of access to water. So many of these fungi and trees have formed a relationship where actually the fungi grow to the root tips, sometimes even into the roots or even into the cells of the roots. The trees accept that, they even want that, because now they can exchange water and minerals for sugar. So the tree gives a part of its sugar from photosynthesis to the mycorrhiza, to the fungi, and the fungi gives the tree access to more water and minerals and nutrients. What's our design guideline here? Find value through win-win interactions. So in our ecosystem of a tree, this is a very important part of the ecosystem. In the soil, relationships happening between fungi and trees, complex relationships that work in different ways. There are some trees who completely depend on these relationships. They can only survive if they are interconnected with fungi. There are also, of course, some fungi that are bad for the health of trees. It can also happen, parasitical fungi. But especially this cooperative relationship between fungi and trees is also fascinating because it actually makes a kind of web, also called the wood wide web, a mycelial network connecting trees with each other through this fungal network, and trees, we have found out, actually even communicate through this system, through this mycelial system, through electric signals. They communicate with each other through the system of mycorrhiza fungal network. That was part 3. If you want to get the whole story, check out our other videos about life principles or our video, What is Biomimicry? Thanks a lot. See you next time.